Okay, let's talk about arrays. Make a new class. Call this our ArrayDemo. So throughout the bootcamp, collections are going to play a vital role in everything that we do. Ultimately, we are going to be managing databases. And a database is just essentially a collection of objects. You can think of the rows and columns of a spreadsheet, and it works the same way. So we're going to start with our simplest and most rigid form of collections, and that's an array. And as you experiment and experience different types of collections throughout the bootcamp, you're going to see why the basic array itself is going to be something that we don't use quite as often. It doesn't really allow us the flexibility that the others will, or the power, but it'll be the first that we learn. All right, so I want to make an array of integers. So the data type will be int, and then anytime you see the square brackets, that represents that you're creating an array. Let's just do a collection of numbers. Now, what I like to do when I name an array or any type of a collection is make sure that it's plural, because it represents to me as the developer that, yes, I'm going to be holding more than one thing in that variable or that object. So we're declaring it like an object with the new keyword. And then what we can do here is key in the amount of objects that we want to record information for. So in this case, 5. We start at index position 0, just like we do with strings. We can go ahead and key in some data here. And the way these read are numbers at whatever index position that we're talking about here. In this case, 0 through 4 creates our 5 items in this array. Now we could simply print these out one at a time. And you would see the result come back to you. And it's running my string demo here. I can already see that. So let's go ahead and close. And we'll go ahead and run this one that's more true off of the main method. There we go. You can see the number that comes back. What if we just did the array by itself? Let's go ahead and take a look at that. It just prints out a hash code or object location of this item. So there needs to be more to it. In that case, we would specify the value that we're trying to print. Okay, that's one way you could print. We could also iterate through this. This is iteration again, which is a term that you've heard. And we talked about iteration when we were dealing with a string. When we did a loop that iterated through each index value of the string and printed out the letter, well, we can iterate through an array as well. So we can have an index position in a for loop that starts at I. We can go to where we hit numbers.length. And just something to point out to you here. That dot length is a little bit different for an array versus a string. When it was a string, it was a method. But in arrays, if I use my dot operator, you can see that length is actually a property. It is not a method. There's no parentheses attached to it. Okay, there we go. And then we can just print out numbers at position I, would make this nice and flexible then to print each of the values out in our array. So we're iterating through that array. And you can see it produces all those values that we have in the array. And we could concatenate some things here. For example, that would read a little bit better for us to see the value at each index position. And there you go. And we have to be careful of edge cases. So, like for example, if we did less than or equal to here, now we've exceeded the boundary of the array. So let's see what kind of an error we get. Index 5 out of bounds. So an out of bounds error can be really common when you're dealing with traversals. Now, other things we might want to do is traverse an array and then use some logic to pick out items from the array. So for example, find all the even numbers in the array. So in this case, we'll use the same for loop. But we'll have some if logic in here. So if numbers at position I is evenly divisible by 2, so we're using mod division there. We're going to say there's no remainder when you go to divide by 2. Then we are going to print out that value. So print that out. So we could do a nice little introduction here above this loop logic. Okay, and that logic there should allow us to traverse the array and check each position to see if it's divisible by 2. If it is, then we can print that value out. All right, let's take a look at that. And we can see that our even numbers in the array are 42, 86, and 8. All right, so there's also a different way that we might see an array declared, and that's an initializer list. And this is where we just assign the values a little differently. So here we declare the array with the size, and then we manually key the data in one at a time for each index position. So we can do a little bit of a shortcut here. Let's do a string, just so you can see something different, of words. Right, and then we basically have just declared that array to take on whatever size of the values that we have inside of it. So in this case, we can see that the length of words should be 3. And then we can also print out stuff like words at 0, for example, or words at 1, and we should be able to see those values come back to us basically in the same way. And that's just an initializer list, a little bit of a shortcut to declaring the array. So basically the left-hand side stays the same, where you do the data type, the square bracket, and the name of the collection or the array, and then the right-hand side is what's a little bit different. Those are very similar. So let's go ahead and run that. You can see that it recognized the length, and then it also printed one of the values. All right, so there's some basic demos for you. The more traditional way that you're going to declare and assign values to an array. Iteration with some logic, and an initializer list. Let's try a couple of problems here. And you've been assigned some practice problems. And since these ones have a little extra layer of logic to them because they're arrays, we're going to do one or two together here. And I'm really interested in showing you some ways that you can incorporate user input into managing an array. So let's do some array example problems here. So for this first one, let's ask the user for their top 4 vacation spots, and then we'll display the results. So if you want to pause the video and try this one on your own, you're more than welcome to. We have to deal with user input, then we've got to create the array, then we've got to show the results. So import scanner. And we'll go ahead and create our array here. I'm going to have it as a string. And then we'll declare the size. We want to enter 4. Now let's prompt the user for some information. Whoops, I forgot my main method. Print line wasn't working. Let's go to code. Format. Everything's formatted. All right, now we're wrapped in a main method. We are basically going to record these on each line. So I'm sure you're already seeing a pattern here. And anytime you start to see a pattern in code, there's probably a more efficient way that we could do things. And if you were thinking that a loop might be a little bit of a better tool to use here, you're probably right. All right, so now that you have those recorded by the user, we can do our loop. And we can print. Okay, so now we've got a nice flexible problem that creates an array, records the data, and places it in the array from the user, and then we can give this information back in a print line statement. Let's go ahead and check this out. We just hit enter after each one. And then it goes ahead and it'll give those back to us. Right? If we wanted to make this a little bit more efficient, control / that just to comment it out. We can basically use this same for loop here. And inside we would do input.next line at position I. So let's go ahead and try that. That should give us the same result with a little bit tighter code. There you go. Now, come to think of it, we could even make this more flexible. Ask the user for their top vacation spots. Maybe it's not the top 4. So, for example, let's say we have an integer called num top vacation spots, right? Well, we could then ask the user, how many they have, they can enter this number in. And then that can become our value that goes here where this 4 is. So anywhere there's a hard-coded value, we can always replace it with a variable. So in this case now, let's say we have 2 top vacation spots. Cleveland and Columbus, of course. And that kind of stepped through weird, so let's go ahead and fix up a few things. Enter your top. We got to fix that. So we'll fix that there. And usually when I'm entering in an integer and then it's followed by a string, I might need to do an input.next line here, just so that I don't get some weird things that happen that we step through. Right, so let's clean this up. And we'll see if that behaves for us a little bit better. There we go. Okay, we can play it again. Maybe we have 3 favorite vacation spots. All right, and let's just review that one here. Really flexible problem in this particular instance where we ask the user basically for the size of the array, storing that in num top vacation spots. Once we have that, we can plug that in. So we've got a flexible array here. And then what we're doing is we're just asking the user to list those out. So we always, more often than not, are going to need 2 loops here. 1 loop for data entry, 1 loop to print the results. All right, nice work.